My name is Mike Klavon. I'm from the Ottawa Area Intermediate School District, and I am contracted half-time through Alt Shift, which is part of the Office of Special Education through the Michigan Department of Education. I've been leading the development of the Delta Math RTI program for the last 14 years. I have a lot of help within our ISD and throughout the state of Michigan. And the tools that we've developed were all based on the evidence-based recommendations from the IES practice guides on helping struggling learners in mathematics K through 8. And we just have a lot of support from around the state, helping teachers, identifying potential barriers, brainstorming possible solutions. So it's kind of an evolving system of resources that we just put together throughout the last decade. And if you've experienced Delta Math 5 years ago, you may notice many more resources available now since we've had time to learn and explore and develop and really put our time towards helping as many teachers as possible to identify students and support them when they struggle. When you click on Tier 3, these are for students that are more than a year behind grade level, and we're trying to identify their needs and accelerate them through these high priority topics. And when you click on a grade level, it will give you all of the Tier 3 standards that are part of the screener. We assess students on each of these standards, 3 problems per standard, so that we try to get our screening time down under 50 minutes. And when you have a student that you want to support on any one of these standards, when you open up one of the standards, you will see teacher copies, which provide all of the guides, instructional guides for teaching the lessons, as well as student copies, which have all of the guided practice problems, all of the quick checks used to measure growth, and the growth chart for progress monitoring, and then any other implementation supports like place value cards or counting frames. The videos are part of the supports we developed for teachers, but now they're actually being used with students by some of the instructors. All of the lessons follow the build, draw, write learning progression, which is the CRA, Concrete Representational Abstract. And there's a gradual release of responsibility built in each of the sessions. So the teacher starting with a modeling problem of thinking aloud like a proficient problem solver. That is what these 3 links are for. They're videos of the contextual problem using George Polia's content literacy starters. What's the problem about? What am I trying to find? What do I know? What can I try, and does my answer make sense? And it's just a nice overview of what's available in the lessons and the types of problems students can focus on for this readiness standard. We also searched for virtual manipulatives, since there are many online support happening in the last 2 years with COVID. So the guided practice problems, I don't know if my screen's going to continue to share into this tab, or did it stay on the old page?
We can see it.
Excellent. So we embedded our guided practice problems into virtual manipulatives from the Math Learning Resource Center, the people who gave us Bridges curriculum. And we can see that we're using 5 frames, 10 frames, graphic organizers to help students see anchors of 5 and 10 and answer questions. So when we're using this manipulative, we're just identifying how many counters we have, but we're going to fill the 10 frame first, see the leftover, and then have our groups of 10 and some more. So I just wanted to give you a brief snippet of one of the virtual manipulatives that are available when you're using the lessons and if you don't have access to the physical manipulatives. So the virtual manipulatives are nice, but our favorite resources that a lot of these secondary teachers are speaking about are the additional guided practice problems. These are graphic organizers that are built in order to model together a visual representation of the standard. So like for adding and subtracting integers, we have a problems where we're adding negative integers. In this case, we're going to take -6 minus -2. We're going to draw our -6 integers, take away the 2 negative integers, and use these drawings in order to get a better understanding of subtraction being like adding the opposite. With all the Delta Math lessons, we highly encourage students to take all subtraction problems to add the opposite so that those barriers of accidentally subtracting the wrong things or adding the wrong things don't become a barrier to solving equations and combining like terms. These graphic organizers allow a couple problems for the teacher to model with the students, an opportunity to reflect, and then a couple problems for students to work in pairs. One thinks aloud while the other listens and follows along, and then they switch roles so that we're always trying to get kids thinking and doing and connecting to the visual representations. There are always going to be 3 forms for each readiness standard of the additional guided practice so that multiple days can be worked on a standard. And then the last page in each of the documents are sample solutions so that if you're not familiar with the strategies being used or the visual representations, you can get a little bit of professional learning support with these solutions and then work forward in your learning and then supporting students. So these graphic organizers, we've gotten some pretty good feedback that when there's not enough time for intervention in an MTSS process, these can be used in quick 10-minute warm-ups or workstation activities or centers, and just help students see the concept and kind of go deeper in their exploration. Another thing that teachers are liking, especially at the secondary level, the online practice. We went to IXL Math and we identified the top 3 to 5 activities for all of the readiness standards. And we have them connected so that if you don't have an IXL account, you still get up to 10 free problems a day that you can engage your kids in thinking and working through the mathematics. So like for solving 1-step equations, we can see that the algebra tiles are being used to model equations. It's another opportunity for students to connect visual with symbolic representations. And if a student is working alone or working with a teacher or an assistant, if they're not really sure what to do with the question in the visual representation, it's nice that the first problem of all of these online practice activities, you can click Learn with Example, have a conversation with the student about the concept so it's not just procedurally driven, but we're really seeing what the student understands of the mathematics, work through a couple problems, and then get them back into the 10 free problems to experience more mathematics. And again, getting students seeing, getting them talking, getting them to interact with the concepts rather than just a recipe or a procedure. Another opportunity of resources, the independent practice for pairs. When you click on these activities, these are usually memory type activities or who has more activities. with directions for 2 or more players. And then there are cards that can be used in order to look for pairs and match them up. And in this case, we have the subtraction cards that we're matching up with add the opposite cards, because again, we're trying to eliminate barriers of thinking and learning. So by having students add the opposite, it takes one fewer barrier away when they're starting to combine like terms, they're starting to solve equations and using integers more frequently. So these can be printed, cut apart, and then having students looking for the pairs in a memory setting where one set of cards is face down, the other sets of cards are face up, and they're taking turns matching those cards. And then if you're not using the lessons, if you're just utilizing the individual engagement activities that we have for each standard, the quick checks and growth charts, these are originally integrated in all of the 8-day lessons that we build, draw, and write with, but we pulled them out so that if you're working on adding and subtracting integers, you could have a quick way to monitor progress over 8 sessions using the quick checks, which are just usually 4 to 6 problems done in 2 to 3 minutes. And it's focused on an individual learning target so that students can follow their progress from day to day on a standard they might have been struggling with. They can hopefully use this progress to make personal learning goals for that 10 or 15-minute activity and how they want to progress towards learning target. And it's just a quick way to measure and monitor progress without you having to create a bunch of mini assessments and the growth chart that students can use to track that progress. Okay. Because of my work with Alt Shift, everything you see on the website is free of charge. There's professional support that's available, and visual fluency cards. We get a lot of students entering middle school, and teachers are sometimes challenged when students still are just spitting out memorized facts without meaning or a strategy to get to answers. So we've built the visual fluency cards so they can be used at all grade levels and hopefully get students thinking visually and being able to see the mathematics, but utilizing double 10 frames and getting students to see the team numbers as a 10 and some more ones. And then we're utilizing the count up strategy because most students can count up much more proficiently than counting back. So we have the symbolic facts of 12 minus 5 or 12 minus 9. We have it shown visually, and then we have the count up to subtract strategy card with the answer. So these cards are available so that you can do multiple different layers of activities. In our table tent directions, we have about 7 different activities that are progressed from beginning to mastery. The first one, just starting with the regular card sort, where students are matching all 4 different types of cards to see their connections, to talk about their connections. And then we start one at a time playing matchup games, where we have here like sets B and A, that we're going to have one set face up, so each student has 6 cards. We have the other set face down, and students are taking turns seeing who can match their cards quicker than the other student. And by having a set face up and a set face down, it's slightly less difficult for students who may not enjoy having to memorize where the cards are in both different sets. We progress through different types of cards so that we're utilizing the symbolic cards with the add up or think, add to subtract strategy. And then we move into the answer cards with the strategy cards before we go to a full memory. So the table tends to progress you through with what we can do with all of the visual fluency cards. And then the types of cards could meet your students where they are if they need to start with adding the 5, if we have a cognitively impaired or somebody that's working at a much lower grade level. And even the multiplication and division cards, we are trying to highlight groups of 5 so that when students are multiplying by a number larger than 5, they can see 4 times 5 and 4 times 3. And then they can have these subproducts, the partial products of 20 and 12 that combine to be 32. We don't expect all of this math to happen every time they do a multiplication problem, but we're trying to provide a generalized strategy so that if they're relying on a couple different facts by just memorizing, they're getting it wrong, they can incorporate a strategy of 5 and some more to work up from guessing and not getting it correct most of the time to taking 3 to 5 seconds to getting it correct to eventually automatizing it because they overlearned it rather than just a typical flashcard that only gets them to the guessing game. The virtual card sorts, we have the same whole number operations that we just looked at with the visual fluency cards, but these were built on Desmos.com in their applications, and you can always continue without signing in. But thanks to Shauna, these are all shared in the Desmos website. So if you have a Desmos account, you can share these through your own account and have access to students in your account and watch them move. You can freeze their screens, have conversations. But we would we'd get all of the symbolic problems at the top. And then we have our 10 frame cards. So 7 times 8 would be our 7 groups of 8. And 9 times 6 is our 9 groups of 6. And we then connect to the area model. So 7 times 8 are 7 groups of 5 and 7 groups of 3, so that our kids are kind of subitizing with an area model and a 10 frame model. And I'm going to just randomly throw cards together and see if I get them correct. Just to let you know, as a teacher, if students are moving on their own and they click next, it auto corrects or it checks their work and it says 1 or more of your matches is not correct. Please click back and try again. So then hopefully they would look to see where they made a mistake, redo their problems. And I apologize that on the free app, we can't control the size of the font at the top of the screen. So I wish that the directions were just a little bit bigger. But all of the virtual card sorts have 4 different slides for students to work through. The instructional protocol, I didn't mention with the additional guided practice, the visual fluency cards, we have a before, during, and after suggestion with reflection questions because we know students learn math best when they're talking and when they're reflecting on their thinking. So we're trying really hard to give you some of the good questions to ask and discuss with your students so that you don't have to take the tool and then figure out how do you take it to the next level of reflection and having students summarize. We also have all of the integer cards on our virtual card sorts and all of the fraction concepts, so that even as basic as identifying fractions in their parts, not all middle and high school students need this, but every now and then it doesn't hurt to have them reconnect on what a fraction is. And if we're starting with our pink cards and connecting it in the directions, we're going to match the pink cards with the yellow cards. So our 3 shaded equal parts We want to bring in that precise mathematical vocabulary of equal parts. We have our 2 shaded equal parts in our 4. And then looking at numerators, our numerator is 4. So if we're looking at our 4 equal shaded parts, denominator is 3 because we have 3 parts total, and then our 4 parts total. And then we can have our 4/9, 3/4, and 2/3. So even though it's a really basic understanding of fractions, this might be a good activity for a lot of students who struggle that fractions are made of equal parts and that the denominator is referring to the number of parts we're speaking about. And did I just say denominator? So I meant to say the numerator is the number of parts we're speaking about, and the denominator is the number of parts total of the fraction. So it's all of these card sorts are available for the fraction progression, the integers, and whole number operations. And hopefully this summer, we're going to be building more for the algebra concepts so students can really see more of what variables look like, how do they interact with each other, and really get to understand zero pairs much with more conceptual understanding. The independent practice was originally created for when students have conceptual understanding and are pretty good with procedural fluency, and there's fewer visual representations and more using the doing the math. So the independent guidance, independent practice is more like a engaging problem set, a active worksheet where they're matching problems with solutions, where the additional guided practice, these are the graphic organizers that were designed for when teachers don't have time to teach everything conceptually over 8 days, that they can utilize the graphic organizers, do some mathematics as a we do together, connecting the visual with the verbal and the symbolic, and then have students do just a couple practice problems to reconnect during warm-ups. So additional guided practice is more conceptually connected to visual, verbal, and symbolic, where the independent practice is more for retaining and maintaining the understanding of mathematics. If you're curious for what are all the visual representations used during the instructional resources, the lessons, the additional guided practice, on our information and support tab, at the very bottom is a new page that we are beginning to develop. And we have all of our learning progressions that are by grade level and clustered so that we can see the number sense standards, the addition standards, and subtraction. And then it moves into our fraction concepts and our algebra concepts. But where it gets a little bit more meaningful, we have a nice article that introduces the CRA learning instructional sequence. And it's a nice shallow dive into some of the research, the why we would be doing this, and then some examples of our CRA progression throughout mathematics. Some really strong videos that you might be interested in watching that we're hoping to tie into professional learning. But to make a long story short, I was hoping to get you to the very end where you can click on a domain, like I clicked on the algebra concepts, and all of our lessons are built on using algebra tiles and then moving into drawing the algebra tiles and then using symbols and numbers in order to think of the visual representation, but do the mathematics with understanding. So as you scroll down, you could find any of the standards in the algebra concepts sequence and see what the algebra tiles look like as we're simplifying with zero pairs, and then moving into the drawings, and then moving into some strategies that we use with our single, double, and triple underlining, just to visually identify, one way to visually identify the like terms and being able to combine or eliminate with zero pairs. So this site is a nice site to quickly see what visual representations are being used throughout the tier 2 and tier 3 intervention columns. If you're looking for other implementation supports, if you don't mind me just highlighting a couple other web pages, our implementation training. If you ever have a school or region that would like to dive deeper into understanding, we provide a 3-hour implementation training session that aligns with the professional learning community questions of what should all students know and be able to do, how we know if students know and can do it, and what will we do when they don't or can't do it. So all of our standards can be found under what students should know and be able to do. And then all of our resources about screening students. What does it look like? Options for screening students at home, data reviews for each of the screening cycles. When teachers and leaders go through implementation training, this becomes kind of like their backbone to where do I go to answer questions that I think I remember the answers, but I don't want to spend more than 3 minutes looking. So we come here, and then what will we do when they don't know or can't do it? The intervention lesson design, we have intervention cycle overviews, which show the 8-day sessions from re-engagement to building to drawing the mathematics. And we have a video, that 3-minute video that kind of describes that 8-day progression and the resources that are available, along with the tier 3 intervention cycle overview. Similar, but it stretches that CRA progression over 8 sessions rather than a 3-day session for the tier 2 intervention lessons. And then, yes, the readiness standards by grade level. Since most of you are secondary, how about we come to, say, 6th grade? We have the readiness standards for 6th grade, which are what students should have learned by the end of 5th grade, which is why we would want to identify who may need additional support before it becomes a barrier to learning. And then for students not responding to tier 2 intervention, the tier 3 standards are from 2 prior grade levels from the readiness standards. So many special education teachers that are utilizing Delta Math, they are providing for 6th grade students the 6th grade tier 3 screener in order to identify where learning may have left off, accelerate students through the learning that the unfinished learning that they have with the tier 3 screener. Then they can use the 6th grade readiness screener to take that next level towards current grade level standards. And then hopefully all of that work is giving them more support in grade level conversations and learning. And it's just, yeah, it's more of a 1-page summary of where the standards are created for readiness versus the other grade levels in a single page.
And this way we can see how fractions develops over the grade levels.
Yes.
And then provide people, but that's a really nice format.
Oh, thank you. I actually forgot that format was there, so thanks for reminding me.
This is where this is good, but it's also like rabbit hole. So I appreciate, like, I'll have the video and I'll be able to go back and say this is where to find it. And go ahead with the intervention kits and the drawing tools.
Sure. The intervention kits are a response to interventionists and teachers that are using the lessons And many of the lessons use guided practice cards. So when we're building fractions, we have the cards rather than just reading off of a worksheet, the fractions that we're going to be building or adding or subtracting. So all of the guided practice cards and the independent practice cards are printed on cardstock, perforated, and then put in order so that an interventionist or a teacher can grab the readiness standard that they're working on and more easily separate the cards and put them in bags to use with their students. So if you remember, the independent practice activities were the ones that were a little less conceptual, but they were helping students maintain understanding in a matching game or a who has more game. So all of those independent practice cards are in the intervention kits, as well as counting mats, place value cards, or other supports that we use in the lessons. Each grade level is $79.99, and we work with the local print shop in Zeeland, and they put them all together and we put them in tubs with paper clips, sandwich bags, and a master of all the cards that go with which lessons. And then we did have some feedback. Schools that were using regular base 10 blocks or regular algebra tiles, none of them are labeled, and our students were using the characteristics of the cards to name them more than the unit values. We started developing our own custom resources that are labeled and proportioned so that kids can see and say that they're working with hundreds and tens and ones so that the mathematics is more accurate. And the algebra tiles, we're using our positive x squareds, x's, and positive ones. And then all of the negatives are red so that it's not a green, blue, or yellow, but we're working with positive variables or negative variables. And the x squareds are really nicely named because they really are squares, and it really shows how multiplying monomials and binomials start to work together, and then the factoring of those. And then lastly, we have a lot of teachers working with drawings and math drawings to work with that representational phase of learning. With some of those barriers where kids draw really tiny, or they draw sideways, or they scrunch things together. So we created drawing guides so that it hopefully the goal is it slows students down, it gets them more accurate and organized, and it allows them to talk through the mathematics in real time rather than making a quick drawing and then going back and trying to rephrase what they did. So we're getting some pretty good feedback that drawings are getting more organized, more mathematical, and kids actually see them as kind of fun rather than just another math tool that is going to help them think about mathematics and see the mathematics. Well, we've learned through a lot of experiences that you need to go slow to go fast. And we believe that that professional learning community framework of what should all students know and be able to do. How will we know if they know and can do it, and what we will do if they don't know or can't do it? And then what will we do if they do know and can do it? We've been working on that last question so that as schools are working with students who have unfinished learning on a specific readiness standard, they're using the independent practice or some of the card sorts for students without unfinished learning as an extension and an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper in that concept without feeling like they're being explicitly taught when they didn't need that explicit instruction. A little story, I'm a math teacher, I'm a horrible storyteller, but one of our schools in Southwest Michigan 5 years ago started using Delta Math, and the teachers looked at the readiness standards and upon first glance said, there's no way our kids can ever reach these standards because they're coming from communities that do not have a lot of support in education. And it was a really tough struggle to get them to try something new. After the first couple of months of using the intervention lessons and having kids work with the visual models, they started to see some decent growth, but they still didn't feel like their kids were quite there and able to accomplish all of the readiness standards in each grade level. And after the second year, they've had some professional learning opportunities. They come together every other month to share data. And now most of their grade levels by Thanksgiving have every single kid at benchmark on all of the readiness standards. And they were the first school district that really showed us that by having all of our students with finished learning in the readiness standards by Christmas allows us to take all of those MTSS resources and screen up so that their focus can now be on readiness for the next grade level, which means they are the current grade level standards that the teachers are working on. So they went from petrified and terrified that their students would never be able to do it to having some of the best scores I've ever seen. And it almost looks like they're cheating because their scores are that clean and strong. But they've also had some really unique experiences with a push-in model. They have elective teachers that are coming into the classroom during intervention time, and the elective teachers are doing all the enrichment work with students that don't have unfinished learning. So the classroom teacher can take the smaller groups and work on the interventions to help students finish the learning. So, moral of the story, I think we can never know what kids can do until we give them a chance to do it. And believing in yourself and having a system and sticking with it can really be profitable in terms of student engagement and achievement. And start small because it doesn't happen overnight. And secondary students, especially, it takes a relationship to get them to start using manipulatives without them feeling like you're doing something that's beneath them, like little kids. So just be aware when you hand a ninth grader algebra tiles and they've never used them before, there's gonna be an emotional reaction that we have to help the students work through. And in some cases, the reaction might need us to go to the additional guided practice and utilize the drawings and take away the barrier of the manipulative until you have that relationship, you have the trust with the students, and then they're willing to say, okay, I'm ready to just take a deep breath, use these as tools, and you're not treating me as a little kid. You're treating me as somebody that has every chance to learn this and talk about it. And personally, I had the fortunate opportunity to co-teach with special education teachers for 10 years at Holland High School. And it was one of the greatest opportunities I had in my life, working with students who traditionally struggled and didn't have a huge belief of self-efficacy, but to see them grow, to see them gain confidence, to see them get a voice, it's really exciting. And it makes me feel like I don't have a job. I have a fun hobby that I get to help other people, help kids, and not have to search the internet till 1 a.m. looking for resources that can hopefully support students with the needs that they might have. Okay, my soapbox is done. I hope that wasn't too corny or too much information, but I thank you for giving me a chance to share.